Hello everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Reed and today we are going to be reading some malicious compliance stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Try and screw over my 70-year-old in-laws? I'll spam your company with documents. A bit of a backstory. My in-laws are 67 and 70, speak Spanish as a main language and English very little. I handle most of their business situations if they need something faxed or any documents sent to most places, or call companies on their behalf. They frequently ask me for help and I love them and of course help them out whenever. I've been helping them for about 5 years at this point. Many years ago, they helped my sister-in-law with some student loans to get her started in school. I'm unsure if they had to pay any amount back as this was before I joined the family. They are on Social Security and don't work, and they, my sister-in-law, found a program that allows them to submit documents to a branch of the Department of Education that shows they have no employable income, which Social Security doesn't count as income. So for 3 years, as long as the documents and forms are submitted on time, that shows they have no income, they do not have to pay their portion of these loans, and after the 3 years, it's forgiven. They approached me in October with all the documents to send with the letter that shows where they go, listed as an email, P.O. box, and fax number, and a phone number for help. Cool, I've done this before. I can fax them after work. I also digitize them and send them to the email because I like having my bases covered. Everything is good, or so I thought. They get a letter at the beginning of January that because they didn't receive the documents, their account is no longer eligible for this program. Excuse me? Enter me being ticked. I have my spouse verify the fax and the email that is correctly typed and it all got sent to the right places, so I know I didn't mess up somehow, and I now call the company only to reach a woman who must have been having a bad day. Woman and me. Woman. How can I help you? Yeah, I sent in some documents back in October for my in-laws, and we just got a letter that says the account wasn't renewed properly. Can you tell me what's going on? Woman asks for names and birth dates. I give them to her. Yeah, we didn't receive anything from you. That's not possible. I have confirmation for both the fax and email. I never got any kind of failed reply for email, and the fax would have given me some kind of busy notice. It's important to note also that there is an automatic reply when you send their email anything, which I also have. Well, I don't know what to tell you. All I can do is give you our information and you can resubmit it. That's it? You aren't going to double check the email or faxes to see if it just got misplaced? This isn't the first year I've done this and I've never had a problem. Like I already said, there isn't anything here. All I can do is give you our information. Okay, fine, give me your fax and email, which of course is what is printed on the letter they received. I end the call, not at all happy. At this point I'm suspicious that they misplaced the documents because it's the final year of their program, and after this they don't have to pay back the loan. How convenient that even with the confirmation the documents are lost. Cue malicious compliance. I have a P.O. box, an email, a fax, and a day off. I make a few copies and head to the post office. I certify the mail so I have a tracking number and signature required pickup. Next, I head to a fax machine. I proceed to send the same fax every 10 minutes for an hour. Letting other people use it if they need to, of course. I'm not a monster. Then I digitize it again and send an email every 10 minutes. I waited until I got a notification that the mail was delivered, then I called again. I am fully prepared to argue, based on my phone call from last time. Unnecessary. The guy this time was super nice. I give him the info he needed and explained what happened and asked him if he got it. He said, "Oh yeah, I have about 10 emails. I'm looking at the physical mail right now, and I have about 12 faxes. We got it." Excellent. I tell him I was not at all happy with the person I spoke to before, who was not at all helpful, but that he has made me much happier. I also mentioned the stress my in-laws went through when they got a letter stating the account wasn't in the program anymore, and they would have to pay back a huge loan that they couldn't afford. He said he was surprised the documents were lost, as that doesn't usually happen, especially since I had confirmation they went through. In the end, all is good. But don't screw with old people when they have a daughter-in-law more than willing to waste an entire day to defend them. It made me sad and angry because who knows how many elderly people are in similar situations who are taken advantage of because of some awful person. It made me sad and angry because who knows how many elderly people are in similar situations who are taken advantage of because of some awful person. There are lots of awful people out there in this world. That's why we need OP to stand up for all the elderlies. How a polar bear got the colonel arrested. As you may know, hunting and fishing is very big in Alaska. I don't hunt, and I'm a very occasional, as in a few times only, fisher. What's important to me and a very large portion of the hunting community is conservation efforts. I've always believed in consume what you take and strictly adhere to conservation policies, limits, species, etc. Alaskan outdoorsmen are very knowledgeable of these rules and regulations, and with good reason. The Fish and Wildlife Service is always watching and is very quick to levy huge fines and even imprisonment for outdoorsmen not following the strict policies. Outdoorsmen are also highly encouraged to report offending personnel in order to assist with compliance efforts. This story takes place about 15 years ago, so all people here have likely moved or retired. We had built a new center in Alaska for the Army. In the old center, there was a very large and imposing taxidermed display polar bear swiping at a seal. When I say large, I mean a polar bear that was at least 12 feet long, he was on all fours, in a display that was about 16 feet by 8 feet by 6 feet. It was a massive display of a polar bear that was taken prior to the ban in 1972, Marine Mammal Protection Act. The Army wanted this display in the new center, but since it was so large, we had to leave it in the old center until the very last days. I did routine inspections of the new center at least twice a year where I would meet up with the head civilian. I loved my trips to Alaska because it was such a beautiful place. It should be noted that at the time, my big boss was at the Pentagon and his last name was very unique. Let's call him Colonel Polar Bear. On one particular inspection, about 3 years after the new center had been built, I noted that some new policy was coming down from Colonel Polar Bear's office that would affect all of our installations. The civilian kind of grumbled and smirked, then said, "Okay." I could sense that he was irritated, but I didn't know why. I found out later why from one of the motor pool technicians. The civilians here were guard/reservists who wore a uniform 1 weekend a month, and also were Alaskan residents who had been in the state for many years. The uniformed personnel in charge of the facility and units were active duty and consisted of personnel from all around the country. The motor pool tech told me that prior to Colonel Polar Bear getting his lofty position, he was the active duty commander of the units here. He was not from Alaska, and he was not liked at all. He was racist, sexist, and constantly berated all those lower ranking than him. In one particular instance, he yelled at a female non-commissioned officer who was having trouble doing push-ups. He shouted, "You know why you can't do them? It's because your chest is too freaking big," in front of all the soldiers. So Colonel Polar Bear was actually the commander at the time when we were finished building and were transitioning to our new center. The old center had been earmarked for demolition, which could not proceed until the final piece was removed. That's right, the aforementioned polar bear display. Unfortunately, we had no place to put it due to the size. Well, thankfully Colonel Polar Bear offered up his big house close by where he could store it in the interim. He had the civilian workers carefully move it to the Army's truck and then carefully roll it into his house. Well, there was just one issue. Not only could you not hunt or shoot a polar bear in Alaska since the very early 70s, you cannot display them in a private residence without a license. Colonel Polar Bear, not being from Alaska, apparently did not know this rule. After the truck and the workers left the house, fish and wildlife officers arrived within hours to arrest Colonel Polar Bear. They placed him in handcuffs and walked him out of his house in view of all. This was all thanks to an anonymous call. After all, Alaskan outdoorsmen have to follow the rules. After Colonel Polar Bear was released, he promptly called a mandatory meeting for all active and guard/reserve personnel to attend in formation and in uniform. As everyone stood at attention, red-faced Colonel Polar Bear yelled that he wanted to know immediately who had reported him to Fish and Wildlife. As the motor pool tech told me, you could hear a pin drop. This went on for about 10 minutes until everyone was excused. Eventually, the polar bear display was placed in the large entrance to the new center. Unfortunately, I can't find any pictures of it online. I never did find out who was the one or ones that called Fish and Wildlife. It would be absolute sweet justice if the one who reported the colonel was the one that the colonel was yelling at doing the push-ups. Mandatory military parade. I was studying at a military school. It was mandatory for the students with higher grades to participate in the Independence Day parade. For them, it was some kind of reward/responsibility the students had. I did not like anything to do with the military and was studying there only because of my father, retired sergeant. I did not know how to march and do all the other stuff they wanted in the parade and asked to be allowed to not participate. They said I could train, but the training would occur during class time. I was not going to lose class to learn that stuff and just skipped it all. The day before the parade, I asked again if I would be allowed to not participate, but they said it was important for the school in many ways. The next day, during the parade, I participated as they required, but made no effort to do anything correct. It was mandatory to participate, but not be in the correct formation, synchronize, or anything. It was terrible, and the top guys got really angry at the people responsible for making me participate. Next year, the rule that made it mandatory was removed. I love the icing on the cake at the end. Next year, the rule that made it mandatory was removed. Sweet. No promotion equals less work, same pay. I work for a passenger boat company. We have 3 tasks while on board: secure the boats for embarking and disembarking, keep an eye out for safety and order, and check tickets and issue fines. A few years ago, the company asked some of the senior staff to temporarily switch to ticket inspector for high season, with the promise to move permanently within a year. Inspectors get a higher pay, and they only do one task, which is checking tickets and issue fines, a thing that we are already required to do, so many of us say yes, gladly. At the end of the season, our reps contact us and say that we have performed well, so the company is having an examination for our promotion. We say we were assured we would be promoted no matter what. Meanwhile, there's a batch of recent hires who have personal ties with the union and the higher-ups. They aren't very happy with their working conditions. It's a rather tough job, especially in the winter or in bad weather, and they often find ways to be dispensed from service or apply for desk jobs and easily obtain them, even if unnecessary or redundant. Now, we don't have much choice, so we agree to the exam, and surprise, surprise, pretty much nobody makes the cut. They had to promote too because they knew they got perfect scores, despite the exam being for a job that some of us have been doing for decades. At this point, the company has no choice but to look for qualified people among the more recent hires, and wouldn't you know, pretty much all of those who belong to that category immediately pass. Now, the key detail. After we were failed, we were notified with a letter saying we were unfit for the duties of ticket inspector. The malicious compliance. We took those words to the letter and we stopped performing the task of ticket inspectors, which had been part of our job for years. Either we are fit for a job or we are unfit. We brought our letter with us, and the first few times supervisors tried to write us up for failing to check the tickets, we promptly produced our very much official dispensation. Not only this decreased our workload immensely, letting us breeze through even the tougher shifts with ease and generally turning our job into quite a pleasant one, but it cost the company a pretty buck in terms of lost revenue, the fines we don't issue, the greater pay gap they had to fill by using juniors instead of seniors, and the rehiring and retraining of those who still drop out of that job because it's still outdoor work, and some the people who they hired just weren't suited for it. Now, the supervisors don't even bother with us anymore, and I have that rejection letter in a box with other dear memories, like my old D&D character sheets. Oh, edit, I forgot the cherry on top. A couple of months later, their timetable was modified, having them take service at 5 a.m. twice a week. There's no way I could have kept that up. I worked late shifts for most of my career. Dodged that bullet. Oh man, it's an absolute treasure to listen to management or some sort of company trying to be greedy and skimp out on something, and it ends up costing them oh so much more. Well, that's all the stories we have for today. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe for more content like this daily. In the meantime, have the most amazing day.